Well, hello, and welcome back to another episode of Reality Behind the Flight. I'm your host, Dakota Bartels, and today I've got a special guest I want to introduce and tell you a little bit about why we chose to have Mike Ardoin here on the podcast today. So one of the things we're going to talk about is a department within the company called Professional Services. Professional Services handles a few complex missions that we will get into with Mike here shortly, but I want to talk about how we found Mike and how he complements the team. So one of the things that's been going on for a while is the line between mapping and surveying and just the complexities around all those kinds of things. So at FlyGuys, we decided it would be pretty critical to have someone run that department that actually had surveying background, was a licensed surveyor, was involved in many different industries. So we found a guy with a military background, a 107 license, a manned aircraft license, an AMP certification, and really just checked every box we were looking for. So I'm happy to introduce the Director of Professional Services, Mike Ardoin.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you with us. And man, how did it happen for you? How did you even get involved in surveying in the first place?
Oh, well, it's funny. So I actually got into surveying on accident. Had no, aspirations as a child growing up to, become a surveyor. As a child, couldn't even have told you what a surveyor was, right? But no, so, first job, out of high school, working at a local grocery store, pushing buggies, bagging groceries. And I ran into a family friend of ours who had been known for years and just got to chatting. And she asked, that inevitable question, what are you doing with your life? Any college plans, career plans? And, I honestly had no technical or surveying aspirations. My plans were a bit drastically different than we are currently. I planned to become a pharmacist, and I was actually in the pre-pharmacy cohort at UL with plans to transfer to ULM. And, but she had said, well, look, if you're looking to do something other than this grocery store gig, the company I work for is hiring, entry-level field guys. If it's something that interests you, I'll make sure you get an interview. So, I thought, okay, I didn't even know what company she worked for. Turns out it was T. Baker Smith, which is a, engineering firm based here in Louisiana. And now they've got a national or probably international presence, but knew absolutely nothing about surveying or engineering, and, thought, well, let's just give it a try. So I went into the interview, and on my little, resume, I had AutoCAD and, drafting listed as skills, when in reality I had taken a single class in high school, like, intro to design or something like that, and thought, oh, well, that's skills. I should list that on my resume. Well, it caught the interviewer's eye immediately. He said, oh, I see AutoCAD, and we're looking for draftsmen more than we're looking for field guys. Is that something that would interest you? And truth be told, I probably knew enough about AutoCAD to be dangerous, but I said, yeah, absolutely. That would interest me. And who knew that one little embellishment on my resume would kind of change the entire trajectory or, of course, of my career.
It's always interesting interviewing folks on the podcast, and then, of course, meeting people at the trade shows and just in the drone industry, because there's most of the guys that have been in the drone industry and gals who've been in it for a while didn't start out there, right? It's still a fairly new industry to a lot of people, and so it's always fascinating, hearing how somebody sort of got involved in it, and just as important, I think your story of how you landed here at FlyGuys is so interesting. You had about 15 years of experience working across survey, construction, all kinds of different things. I remember reading over your resume and just saying, man, this is just kind of the perfect mix of all these things that we're dealing with all the time at FlyGuys. So I'm curious from your perspective, going back to those early conversations that we were having, what was so interesting about wanting to take on the challenge of what we were describing as professional services to you? What really had you excited about it?
It was the challenge first and foremost, right? I've been in or around surveying and construction for probably the last 15, going on 16 years now. in some facet or another, it wasn't always at a survey or engineering firm. I spent time in sales. I spent time working for construction companies. Somewhere along that line, I realized that I really enjoy kind of building things. I really enjoy walking into a situation where, the playbook isn't yet written. We kind of have an idea of where we want to go, and kind of having that creative and professional freedom to sort of build something that doesn't yet exist. And, right after getting licensed, I was kind of wondering, like, okay, what's this going to shape up for me? Am I going to go and, start stamping boundary surveys and kind of really get into the surveying, the true, pure surveying side of things that I had honestly avoided most of my career? Or am I going to look for some other opportunity to leverage that? And out of nowhere, this opportunity with FlyGuys popped up. And, I was sitting there reading I think I told you this thing, I was sitting there reading through the job posting, and I was like, okay, who was looking at my resume when they wrote this? Because I felt like, and not to sound, full of it, but I felt like each one of the requirements, I was like, yep, I can do that. I've done that. Absolutely. And so the challenge of getting to kind of come in and sort of build this department or this business within the business, kind of expand our capabilities and really kind of refine some of the things that we do and some of the markets that we serve, was something that I just, was immediately drawn to.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe let's spend a little time informing everybody about really what our professional services department is. So I think a lot of people, when they think of FlyGuys, is a marketplace of opportunities for all kinds of different jobs and missions, right? But what professional services really focuses on is that higher tier of more complex missions. If you want to let them know a little bit about that. And we're talking, the LiDAR missions, advanced sensor types, those sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we've spent the last couple of months really trying to dial in like what professional services is. One of the analogies that we keep coming back to that I love and I think it fits is a lot of people who are familiar with the FlyGuys business model, kind of refer to it as, Uber for drones, right? In that you're taking, the supply side, people that need rides, and matching it up with the demand side, right? Or vice versa, the demand, people who need rides, and the supply side, people who have cars and are willing to drive, right? Typical ride share model. But, the FlyGuys model is kind of the same way, right? You're taking guys who have the capability of capturing this data and matching them up with people who need the data, right? There's a level beyond that, and I love the analogy with Uber for drones, because if you're familiar with the Uber model, you're familiar with Uber Black, right? Which is the next level of Uber.
Yeah.
Typically, it's commercially licensed drivers with professional insurance. Most of these guys didn't wake up one morning, download the app, and decide, I think I'm going to be a professional driver. They kind of already had an established, professional car service in some way, and they kind of plugged into that Uber network as a new channel to get new customers and new business and grow their business. And so when you look at professional services, in a way, it's kind of the same thing if you use that Uber comparison, in that we're that next level, that professional tier of marketplace. Whereas traditional marketplace mission is usually serving like a construction superintendent doing progress monitoring, or some of these AI data companies that just need these massive amounts of imagery to feed into their vision models. And
it's mostly that RGB,
mostly
just individual
RGB
images.
And then there's that layer of drone missions that type of customer, who is that professional, that engineer, that surveyor, or that other, kind of geospatial professional who's taking that data and then producing deliverables that they're then kind of putting their reputation on the line, right? They're stamping it, they're certifying it. And it's how do we take our network, right? This massive opportunity we have for scale, and go out and find these customers that need this data, but maybe don't want to invest in a full-on, drone department. Or we do work for plenty of firms that have their own drone department, but they have new opportunities that they just either don't want to or can't scale up to.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where we come in, right? We're serving it's kind of in the name, we're serving the professional side of the marketplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that's just been a battle, I guess, maybe, is between the traditional survey guys, been around for generations. Very little's changed other than some technology improvements over the years. It works. It's been around a long time. Now introduce this new tool, drones, right? So what I've seen over the past several years is a bit of a disagreement between like a traditional survey company and even a very experienced professional drone pilot, right? Because a professional drone pilot in most cases is not going to be also a licensed surveyor, but they believe that they possess this piece of equipment that's able to capture some really great detail and data that can be highly accurate, but it's just not exactly in the same world. So maybe a better example that I could give is, I've met with lots of different engineering companies, survey companies, that they were just like, nah, we don't want to fool with drones. We had this guy come out and yada, yada, and it didn't work or whatever. The guy didn't know what he was doing. But then at the same time, the technology has evolved and gotten so much better so rapidly that you're seeing a lot of these engineering and survey companies adopting the technology by either bringing it in-house, like you were saying, buying the equipment themselves, hiring surveyors to become also drone pilots, those kinds of things. So what's your experience, being that you quite literally play on both sides? So I think you bring a unique perspective to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it's no secret that there's this sort of underlying animosity between the overarching drone industry and then, surveyors and professionals, right? There's this a little bit of a clash there, right? Where, you have surveyors in various jurisdictions who see these guys, these drone companies who kind of come out of nowhere essentially and sell themselves as, offering mapping services or things like that. And, that really is a gray area that we certainly don't play in, but we're also, trying to make known that, there is this blurry line that, between what's actually mapping and what's considered operating a drone, right? And not diving into that kind of legal gray area. And we're trying to make that line as clear as possible because for those that don't know, even though I am a professional surveyor and we do have a professional services division that works very closely with professional surveyors and professional engineers, we are not a licensed survey firm, nor do we purport ourselves to be a licensed surveyor engineering firm. Our job is to create these data capture and processing workflows that then seamlessly feed into these already existing professional workflows where those guys can take that data that they know has been validated in a way that they trust, right? So at the end of the day, the professional is the one who is still setting the criteria for how this data is getting validated. And then they're the one making the decision on whether or not, what level of data they're willing to trust, what level of data they're willing to accept and incorporate into their deliverables. Because ultimately, it's their stamp that's going on the line at the end of the day, right? Their professional responsibility. So kind of going back to your point about this, sort of animosity that exists between the two side of the industry where you have these drone guys that, kind of bought a drone and, put a couple posts on Facebook, started getting a couple of, hits and leads, and eventually one of those was a surveyor, and they went out and flew a mission for him and turned over a data set. And there was nothing malicious about what these guys were doing. There's simply so much knowledge on the control side, understanding control networks, understanding positioning technology, understanding error propagation that, some of these guys just don't know.
Yeah.
And
how would they, right? Like those
right,
worlds
exactly.
just hadn't collided fully yet.
So you've had these instances where these guys have delivered data sets. Turns out it didn't actually stand up. It wasn't tied to anything. One of the best and worst things about data collected from drones, whether it's RGB or it's LiDAR, is you can go out and you can collect all this data and make this big, beautiful, quote unquote, map. That map then gets passed to a project manager or an engineer or designer who, looks at it and sees this big, beautiful picture and doesn't fully understand the technology with which it was captured. And that data has a bad habit of appearing more authoritative than it actually is. Mm-hmm. So then decisions get made on that data, and that's where problems arise, and that's where the majority of the skepticism towards your average everyday run-of-the-mill drone guy and a surveyor or engineer clash comes from. And quite frankly, as a surveyor, I think that skepticism is earned.
Sure.
Right? Like we deserve it. But there's that side of trying to educate and kind of better understand and bridge that gap rather than try to, drive that wedge in between.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I like that. I think, something just as an industry trend, that I've noticed is, we talk about in FlyGuys that sort of the different sides of the house, right? Like there's the marketplace side that's servicing a very high amount of missions, flying constantly, thousands of missions a month. Those are happening all the time, growing like crazy. The professional services side, there's so much more detail that has to go into each of these missions. There could be ground control. There could be weeks of conversations back and forth with a survey company before you even know, you're ready to mobilize a team to the field. But something that I'm seeing is those worlds coming closer together every day that we advance in this industry. So one of the things I think that's helping with that is AI and the back-end software analytics companies that are putting together all these actionable insights. But what seems to be mattering more and more is the imagery and the impact of each individual image itself. So back way up when you guys were taking pictures for real estate agents, it's pretty pictures, it's our marketing photos and things like that. But when you get into being able to, fast forward a couple years, back up only a couple years from now, you're extracting the GPS metadata. Now you can pull measurements, right? Orthomosaics, photogrammetry, not incredibly accurate with a basic RGB camera, but you can pull measurements, and that's cool. That's super cool. Everybody's excited. Man, I can do this, I can do that. Everybody's making YouTube videos and commercials for their businesses and whatnot. But to Mike's point, if it's not incredibly accurate and certifiable and someone's gonna, put their company name or their individual license up at stake, it's no good, really. It just ends up being a pretty picture, right? But those worlds coming together more and more where it's the barrier to entry or the bar is lowered because the technology has improved. There's training and tools and things available to the drone pilots where they can be more effective. Now, some of the, lower level prosumer drones are so impactful that you're able to do all kinds of higher end construction projects that are almost kind of a blend of these two worlds. And we have to figure out, does it go to professional services or does it go to marketplace? But to me, I just see that's where it's going. And that's why I was so excited to get you on board the company, because with the building information modeling, tying into terrestrial data with the aerial data, like all this stuff just getting more accurate, more actionable, it's just that much more valuable to the company. So I just see all of that exploding, not just for FlyGuys, but just for the industry as a whole, which just means more opportunities for all of us. And, it just gets me excited about the technology. And one of the things that I've seen kind of pop up, a lot of people are excited about is the use of RTK. So I was hoping we could talk about that just a little bit. Sure. I feel like when it comes to RTK, for a lot of pilots out there, let's say you bought a Mavic 3 Enterprise, right? And in order to fly this job, you got to go buy that extra $700 RTK puck. You don't really know what it does exactly, but it's $700 and it means the difference between whether I'm getting this job or not. So oftentimes people are buying it. Takes a couple of screws, you put it on there and enable it on the controller, and all of a sudden you're capturing RTK. What does that even actually mean, though?
Oof, that's a...
just at a basic
No,
level,
that's
right?
a loaded question. But, first and foremost, something I like to say is that, every survey mission might involve RTK, but every mission that has RTK does not automatically make it a survey mission, right? So RTK, for those that don't know, stands for real-time kinematics. It's a positioning technique kind of akin from PPK, where PPK is, you kind of post-process the position to a higher accuracy, whereas RTK, it's kind of happening in real time. We saw this kind of come onto the scene more recently with drones, like with the M3E and M4E, and there's this kind of misnomer that, well, surveyors use RTK, so if I have a drone that has RTK, it must be survey grade accurate.
All of a sudden we're back to the original problem, right?
Right, absolutely.
I'm a drone guy with this piece of equipment, so I think I can do survey grade accuracy. It's not exactly that simple, right?
It's absolutely not that simple, right? So RTK is honestly just a correction methodology, right? What I like to explain to folks is, a drone that has RTK, the primary purpose of that is for the ultra-fast, ultra-precise positioning, right? If you've ever watched, two drones fly side by side, one that's getting real-time corrections, through RTK, and one that's just using kind of the built-in GPS, just their overall trajectory and susceptibility to wind and things like that is completely different. RTK gives you a much straighter, much smoother, much more consistent trajectory, flight path, which then obviously translates into better images being captured, better positions attached to those images. On the LiDAR side, that helps your swath alignment, things like that. But there's this whole other side that you have to really have this fundamental understanding of is, okay, we've captured this data that we're calling survey accurate, but for it to truly be survey accurate or survey grade, it has to be defensible. It has to stand up. You have to be able to prove that accuracy, right? If it's not validatable, it's not valid data, right? Yeah. So without a thorough understanding of, kind of control networks and error mitigation and, ground control point layout and how we validate those and our check shots and stuff, that pretty picture that was captured with RTK is honestly really no more accurate than one that was captured without.
All right, Mike, you said something to me earlier that really stuck with me. You mentioned that it's easier to teach a surveyor to become a drone pilot rather than teach a drone pilot how to be a surveyor. I really like that. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the biggest point is, or the thing that a lot of people miss is, you can't just buy the latest and greatest RTK-enabled drone and then all of a sudden expect your deliverable and your output to level up, right? Flying the drone or flying the mission is honestly the easy part, right? And collecting the data is really this much of the actual work that goes into producing, certifiable deliverables. Not only the knowledge of flying and how to fly, but the knowledge of the payload and kind of how it works, not just the magic black box, not just the payload, but also the positioning technology like your GNSS receivers, things like that. Understanding your control network, how to manage error, things like that. That's the part that takes years to learn.
Yeah, so it's not just as simple as buying the next shiny toy. You really have to understand that equipment, test it, fly it, learn it. Like anything else, you need to know your tool set.
Absolutely.
What's your experience at FlyGuys been? You're a handful of months in now with a tremendous background with all kinds of experience. What do you really want your customers to know about professional services in your department?
I guess the first thing I want to make abundantly clear is that, I already mentioned that we're not a licensed survey firm, but also we as FlyGuys and the drone industry as a whole has no intentions of ever trying to replace surveyors or engineers. It might replace some, field collection techniques or make them more efficient, which is why you see surveyors and engineers adopting the technology themselves. But I also want people to understand that because of our positioning within the industry and because of the type of deliverables that we help these companies produce, we get a whole influx of customers who are looking for, when you actually dive into it, they're looking for a survey, right? And we don't sit there and try to dance around we can give you something close or no, full stop. If anyone on our sales team or our professional service team identifies it, they need an actual survey, or if it's written into, an RFP that, part of the output is certified deliverables, we're immediately pivoting to one of the partners that we already work with. And there's sort of this referral that happens between, us where, we've got a pretty extensive network at this point of surveying and engineering firms that we work with closely, that, we kind of refer customers to them who are looking for an actual survey or, something to be certified. Sometimes that process, right, might be an Alta survey or a Topo survey or something like that, where they do end up needing drone data captured. So then those survey firms, those engineering firms, they're kind of pulling us back into the mix, right, as basically just their collection arm to collect that data, and then they produce that output for that customer. So sort of, they send aerial collection work our way, we send true survey, certification work their way. And so there's this partnership that exists sort of between us and engineers, and I want to make abundantly clear that, without survey and engineering firms, our business model inside of professional services doesn't even exist.
For those types of jobs, we hear it all the time, right? Like, we've got a number of pilots in the network. Everybody wants to get the new thing. Like, that's one really exciting thing about the drone industry amongst many, but there's new equipment coming out all the time. There's always some new upgraded this or this new sensor, this new platform, and it's really exciting to get new equipment. We get a lot of questions from pilots that have done a great job for us for maybe even a number of years, right? But they're flying a lot of RGB mapping jobs. They've got a prosumer, entry, enterprise level type drone, and they are interested in taking that leap. They want to maybe dip their toe in the water and get a lower cost LiDAR unit, or maybe look at some sort of advanced sensor, which means they may need to buy a bigger aircraft. Or some of those guys already have the aircraft, but they're unsure whether or not to get the sensor, because is the work out there? I think there is a good bit of work that's out there, and some of those jobs are really good paying jobs, but what are you looking for, or what advice would you have to the pilot network so that they're the right candidate? What would help them shine?
Okay, yeah. Full disclosure, I will say that there's not a super clear jump from becoming a marketplace pilot to a professional services pilot. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It's happened in many cases, but usually the guys who have, the guys who are looking to do that type of work, who own that equipment, even on the low end, M350 or 400 with LiDAR payload, you're all in, you're probably looking at, tens of thousands of dollars. So the guys who've invested in that type of equipment, have, not just that, but the positioning equipment, the GPS units, things like that. Most of those guys are typically kind of already set up. They already have established successful drone businesses. They've been running for years. They have years of knowledge and experience and, failure and learned from experience, under their belt. This kind of goes back to like the Uber Black reference, right? Where, those professional drivers that operate under Uber Black, they already have a town car service or a chauffeur service. They're just kind of looking to plug into that network. The typical professional services pilot is that already established drone guy who's already flying their own missions, who's trying to plug into this network for more opportunities.
Yeah, tap into a new revenue source,
Absolutely.
New opportunity source through FlyGuys. Yeah.
Buying the equipment, having the equipment is like kind of the tip of the iceberg, right? There's so much more beyond just being able to stroke that check, right? You can buy the equipment, but it's everything that comes beyond, behind that. The other side of that is I don't want to encourage anyone to go out and spend tens of thousands of dollars on equipment and just expect that, we'll have work for them, or that they can just, flip a switch in their profile and all of a sudden they have work. You made a good point that there's not an immense amount of work out there, but it's growing literally every day.
Yep. Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And I think that trend will only continue, as we see kind of the collision of the two worlds between marketplace and professional services. I think as the equipment evolves, there's just going to be so many more opportunities. We see new entire industry verticals utilizing this technology, and then the industries that are already using it and have been for a long time are doubling, tripling, quadrupling down because they're understanding how to extract the value from that kind of stuff. So I think it's still very much an exciting time to be a drone pilot out there. There's just opportunity everywhere. One thing I will say about that, though, is, and this is something that we struggle with, is if you are a pilot out there in the network and you do have a new piece of equipment, any kind of equipment, please let us know about it. And the easiest way to do that is simply go to your pilot profile and update it. Because the way that it works whenever we're offering opportunities through missions in the platform is the first thing that we're doing is looking at two things, is availability via your geography in the region as compared to where the mission is going to happen, and whether or not that pilot has the right credentials and equipment. So simply not having the equipment means you're just omitted from the list entirely, and we wouldn't see you. So please, 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 guys and gals, update those profiles. Otherwise, you just get skipped over, which is unfortunate for everybody.
No, I mean, one thing that we're seeing, I mentioned that, typically the typical professional services pilot is a, existing, drone service provider. They don't directly come out of our network, but you would be surprised how many of these guys who kind of started a drone business, maybe they joined the FlyGuys network, 2-3 years ago, maybe longer, might do a couple marketplace jobs for us, but they're already off building their own drone company, but they never came back to their profile and actually updated that they have this more advanced equipment.
Yeah.
And so on paper, they're invisible to us when we're trying to source that mission. Like, we might have a mission in I can't think of an example right off the top of my head. I think we did some ski slopes out near Seattle, right? And we actually had to not fly a pilot in, but had a pilot travel a good ways to be able to meet that mission. And then a week later found out that there was a guy in the network who lived in Seattle, who had that equipment already.
Yeah, that happens too often, unfortunately. And I mean, Seattle's an enormous town. Like there's got to be more than one guy. And so getting connected with those guys and understanding the landscape of opportunities that FlyGuys can offer is something that we're always just trying to tighten up on that. But it starts with the profile, right? So
yeah, I mean, update your profile for sure. That's the only way that we know that you exist and that you have the capabilities for us to be able to even start the conversation about sourcing you for a mission.
Well, Mike, I appreciate the time. I'm just thrilled about having your background and your level of experience on our team. It's been a wonderful last several weeks, couple of months now, of just seeing you kind of integrate with your team, the existing team there, just really taking a liking to you, and you guys getting your arms around everything that we're trying to do in professional services. It's an ambitious team with a very ambitious goal. So we're thrilled to have you and looking forward to more. If a pilot from the network is really wanting to reach out, maybe they just want to learn more about professional services or something like that, what's the best way for them to reach you guys?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're a pilot that kind of wants to get in touch, or maybe even has questions, or if you're a customer who thinks, oh, maybe I do need to give them a chance. I need to give them a call. You can reach out directly via email, proservices@flyguys.com. Somebody from our team directly inside of professional services will take that email and kind of get the conversation started.
Excellent. Update those profiles and reach out, guys. We look forward to offering more professional services with Mike and his team to you guys real soon. Thank you very much for joining us on another episode of Reality Behind the Flight.